What the hell did you just say to me? Before we dive into one of the most brutal takedowns in corporate history, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You're about to witness a masterclass in revenge, and trust me, you won't want to miss a single delicious detail. What would you do if your life was publicly destroyed? Let me know in the comments right now. All right, let's set the scene. Imagine a ballroom dripping with more money than God. The annual Innovators Future Gala in Chicago, a gathering of the 800 most powerful, ruthless billionaires on the planet. The air is thick with the scent of expensive perfume, aged whiskey, and unchecked arrogance. On stage, a catastrophe is unfolding. Julian Croft IV, a man whose bloodline was richer than most countries, had just snatched the microphone from a woman named Aria Vance. His face, a mask of aristocratic contempt, twisted into a sneer. Without a flicker of hesitation, he seized a flute of Dom Perignon from the podium, its bubbles catching the light like tiny dying stars. And then he poured it over her head. A river of gold cascaded down Aria's face, soaking her simple but elegant black dress, clinging to her eyelashes. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the ballroom erupted. 800 billionaires, the titans of industry, the masters of the universe, exploded in laughter. It wasn't just a chuckle. It was a guttural, braying roar of approval, the sound of a pack of hyenas tearing into a kill. Across the stage, Julian's wife, Isabella Croft, had her phone out, live-streaming the entire sordid affair. "Oh my God, you guys, this is absolutely hilarious!" she shrieked to her 15,000 viewers, her voice a high-pitched dagger of glee. "The help is trying to make a speech." Her son, Harrison Croft, a carbon copy of his father's entitlement, pointed and clapped, his face flushed with delight, egging on the crowd. Camera flashes strobed across the room, turning the public humiliation into a grotesque firework display. And Aria Vance? She stood perfectly still, motionless. A statue carved from obsidian and defiance as champagne dripped from her chin onto the gleaming marble floor. Have you ever watched a soul being flayed in public? Have you ever seen someone's life systematically dismantled in front of hundreds of people? Because what you are about to see will not only shock you, it will change the way you think about power. This quiet black woman's response didn't just silence a room. It obliterated a billion-dollar empire. Julian, basking in the glow of his cruelty, adjusted his bow tie. He leaned into the microphone, his voice booming with theatrical confidence, a showman playing to his adoring fans. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is precisely why we have protocols." Champagne continued to drip from Aria's hair, each drop a ticking time bomb. "The help has clearly gotten confused about which entrance to use. This is a stage for innovators, not the kitchen staff." On Isabella's Instagram Live, the viewer count skyrocketed. 45,000 people were now tuned in. The comments flooded the screen, a waterfall of digital cruelty. "OMG dying laughing. She looks so embarrassed, LOL. Billionaire problems FR." Security should have caught this before she wandered onto our stage. Julian continued his tirade, his back deliberately turned to Aria, dismissing her as if she were a piece of furniture. The crowd murmured in agreement, the clinking of wine glasses a symphony of their shared disdain. Harrison strutted across the stage like a peacock, preening for the cameras, making grand, dismissive gestures. "Ma'am," he said, his tone mocking, "the service entrance is clearly marked. Kitchen staff should know better than this." From a table near the front, a crusty oil heiress named Margaret Sterling loudly whispered to her companions, "How on earth did catering get past security? This is utterly embarrassing for the charity." Beside the podium, unnoticed by the baying crowd, sat Aria's briefcase, a small, discreet monogram, VTD, caught the glare of the spotlights. She reached into the pocket of her soaked dress and produced a silk handkerchief. With methodical, unnerving precision, she began to wipe the champagne from her eyes. The movement was slow, deliberate. As she raised her hand, her watch reflected the stage lights. It was a Patek Philippe, a timepiece worth more than the car Harrison Croft drove. $180,000 detail that none of the Crofts, in their blind arrogance, even registered. The event coordinator, a frantic woman named Mariah, rushed up the stage steps, her face flushed with a panic so profound it was almost comical. "Sir," she panted, her voice trembling. "Sir, there's been a terrible, terrible mistake." "The only mistake," Julian interrupted, cutting her off with a wave of his hand, "was letting unqualified people past security. Handle this properly, Maria. Now." Isabella narrated the scene to her rapidly growing audience. "You guys, this server actually thought she belonged on stage with the real speakers. The audacity is just breathtaking." Her live stream chat exploded in a frenzy of schadenfreude. "Secondhand embarrassment is real. Someone call HR and get her fired. This is why we need better screening processes." At a table in the middle of the room, a business reporter from Forbes, Jake Morrison, had initially been focused on his filet mignon. But the commotion had drawn his attention. He was a veteran journalist who had covered corporate titans for 2 decades. He'd seen arrogance before. But this was different. This was a public execution. And something about the woman's composure, her chilling stillness in the heart of the storm, felt wrong. It wasn't the reaction of a humiliated server. It was the calm of a predator. Aria's phone, tucked in a waterproof pocket of her briefcase, buzzed quietly against her hip. The screen lit up for a brief moment. A Bloomberg alert. Vanguard Tech Dynamics, VTD, shares surge 23% on acquisition rumors. She ignored it. "This is what happens," Julian declared to the audience, his voice swelling with self-importance, "when people don't understand their place in society. Standards exist for a reason." 800 heads nodded in sanctimonious agreement. Phones emerged from designer purses and tailored suit pockets, capturing the spectacle from every conceivable angle, turning the ballroom into a digital coliseum. And then she spoke. Aria's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the laughter and the smug murmuring with the devastating clarity of shattering glass. "Mr. Croft," she said, her tone even, almost conversational. "Are you absolutely certain you want this moment documented?" Julian scoffed, throwing his head back in a theatrical laugh. "Document away, sweetheart," he boomed. "Everyone here should see what happens when the help gets ideas above their station. Let this be a lesson." Isabella cackled into her phone. "Oh my God, you guys, she's threatening to report us. To who? The Better Business Bureau?" The crowd's laughter reached a fever pitch, a tidal wave of derision. Aria's phone buzzed again. This time, the screen displayed a push alert from CNN Business. Major acquisition announcement involving Croft Legacy Holdings expected Monday. Maria, the event coordinator, was now frantically scrolling through her tablet, her hands shaking so badly she could barely type. She searched the official guest list, her fingers fumbling with the screen. WILLIAMS. No. VANCE. Her face went completely white. The color drained from her cheeks as if she'd seen a ghost. "Sir," she whispered urgently, tugging at Julian's sleeve, her voice a desperate hiss. "Sir, we need to—" "Not now, Maria," he snapped, swatting her hand away. "Can't you see we're handling a situation of our own making?" The head of security, a burly man named Todd Anderson, finally made his way onto the stage, his hand resting on his radio, his expression grim. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I'm going to need you to come with me." Arya looked directly into the lens of Isabella's live-streaming phone, a silent acknowledgement to the 50,000 people watching. "Before your security escorts me," she said, her voice still impossibly calm. "May I make one phone call?" "Call whoever you want." Julian laughed into the microphone, the sound echoing through the cavernous ballroom. "The damage is already done. 800 witnesses and 50,000 viewers can't be wrong." With the same methodical calm she had shown throughout the entire ordeal, Arya reached for her phone. Her thumb scrolled through her contacts, each flick of her finger a study in controlled patience. She stopped at a name, and for the first time that night, the faintest hint of a smile touched her lips. She dialed. The phone rang once, the sound amplified through the stage speakers, a stark, lonely tone in the suddenly quiet room. On Isabella's live stream, the viewer count hit 89,000. Anticipation hung thick in the air. The comments poured in. "She's calling her manager. Probably going to get fired on speakerphone, LMAO. This is better than reality TV." Julian gestured grandly to the audience, a Roman emperor in a tuxedo. "Ladies and gentlemen, watch how the real world works. Actions have consequences." The phone rang a second time. Maria stared at her tablet screen in absolute, abject horror. The guest list entry glowed like a death sentence. Keynote speaker: Ms. Arya Vance, CEO, Vanguard Tech Dynamics. Announcement: major industry acquisition. She tried desperately to get Julian's attention, but he was too lost in his own performance, a narcissist high on his own supply. The phone rang a third time. Arya pressed the speaker button, her finger hovering over the answer key. The stage speakers, designed to carry the voices of industry leaders to every corner of the room, would now broadcast her salvation or her final damnation. She looked directly at Julian Croft IV, the champagne still glistening in her hair like a crown of thorns. "This is your last chance to reconsider," she said quietly. Julian threw his head back and laughed, a full-throated, arrogant bellow. "Reconsider what, sweetheart? My generosity?" The fourth ring echoed through the ballroom speakers as Arya's finger pressed answer. But before anyone could speak, Julian, needing to have the last word, grabbed the microphone back. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's not waste any more time on this charade." He nodded to Todd Anderson. "Remove her immediately." Todd stepped forward, his meaty hand reaching for Arya's elbow. "Ma'am, please end the call and come with me. Now." Arya held up a single finger. The gesture was so calm, so utterly authoritative, that Todd instinctively paused, his training overridden by a sudden, inexplicable sense of dread. "Sterling," she said into the phone, her voice carrying clearly through the speakers. "Patch me through to the legal team." A new voice emerged, crisp, professional, and amplified to every corner of the ballroom, a voice that dripped with the kind of power that doesn't need to shout. "Ms. Vance, I was expecting your call. Are you ready for the announcement?" Isabella's live stream chat went berserk. "Who is Sterling? Plot twist incoming. This is getting interesting." Julian's confidence flickered for the first time, a brief tremor in his smug facade. "Security," he barked, his voice a little too loud. "I said remove her now!" But Todd Anderson stood frozen, a statue of confusion, something about the tone of the phone conversation striking him as monumentally significant. "Sterling, before we proceed," Arya continued, her voice as smooth as polished marble, "I need you to confirm the details of our acquisition for everyone present." At the head table, the executives from Croft Legacy Holdings suddenly looked up from their phones, their bored expressions replaced with ones of sharp attention. Eleanor Vance, the senior vice president, whispered urgently to her colleague, "Sterling? Why does that name sound familiar?" "Of course, Ms. Vance," Sterling's voice replied, each word a nail in Julian's coffin. Vanguard Tech Dynamics' $1.2 billion acquisition of Croft Legacy Holdings. The official announcement is scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. The ballroom went silent. Utterly, completely silent. 800 conversations stopped mid-sentence. Wine glasses paused halfway to lips. The clatter of cutlery ceased. Even the kitchen staff, peering through the service doors, stopped moving. You could have heard a stock certificate drop. Julian's face drained of all color. He looked as if he'd been punched in the gut. Vanguard Tech, you can't possibly be... Sterling, Arya continued calmly, twisting the knife. Please also confirm our new diversity and inclusion requirements for all acquired companies, effective immediately. Isabella's phone slipped in her trembling hands. Her livestream viewer count shot past 150,000 as people frantically shared the link across every social platform. This was no longer just a viral moment. It was a historical event. Yes, ma'am, Sterling replied, his voice a cold, factual weapon. All executive teams must demonstrate measurable inclusive leadership practices. Companies failing to meet these new standards will be excluded from all future acquisition considerations and face immediate board restructuring. Harrison Croft grabbed his father's arm, his face a mask of dawning horror. Dad, Vanguard Tech, that's the company that's buying us. If she's really... Impossible, Julian hissed, but his voice had lost all its theatrical confidence. It was a dry, rattling whisper. Maria, finally seeing her chance, managed to shove her tablet in front of Julian's face. The guest list entry glowed accusingly, a digital ghost come to haunt him. Keynote speaker, Arya Vance, CEO, Vanguard Tech Dynamics. Julian's knees buckled. He physically sagged, the air leaving his lungs in a silent gasp. Jake Morrison, the Forbes reporter, was already typing furiously on his phone, sending urgent alerts to his editors. Breaking. Potential discrimination incident involving Vanguard Tech CEO Arya Vance at Chicago charity gala. Hostile takeover implications. Arya's phone conversation continued, broadcast to every single stunned guest. Sterling, what's the status of Monday's emergency board meeting? Everything is prepared, Ms. Vance. The Croft Legacy Holdings board will be voting on the new leadership requirements as a primary condition of the acquisition. The words hung in the air like smoke from an executioner's rifle. Isabella, her hands shaking too violently to hit the right buttons, desperately tried to end her live stream. But it was too late. The comments flooded her screen faster than she could read. Holy Sarchis, the CEO. Those people are so fucked. I can't believe what I'm watching. This is going viral worldwide. Eleanor Vance, the SVP, stood up from the head table, her face pale as a sheet. Julian, she said, her voice tight with fury and panic. We need to talk, right now. But Julian couldn't move. He couldn't speak. The microphone hung limp in his hand as the full cataclysmic weight of his actions crashed down upon him. Todd Anderson, the security chief, took a slow, deliberate step backward, his instincts screaming that he was in the middle of a corporate massacre far, far beyond his pay grade. There's one more matter, Sterling, Arya said, her voice still perfectly calm, a chilling counterpoint to the chaos she had unleashed. The champagne staining her dress seemed less like a mark of humiliation and more like war paint. Please remind me of the timeline for finalizing this acquisition. The contracts require signature by close of business on Friday, Ms. Vance. Any delays, complications, or leadership issues could result in the automatic cancellation clauses taking effect. Friday. 3 days away. Julian finally found his voice, though it came out as a pathetic, strangled croak. Ms. Vance, surely we can discuss this privately. Arya finally turned to look directly at him, her dark eyes reflecting the hot stage lights like chips of obsidian. Mr. Croft, you wanted this moment documented. You insisted everyone should watch. She gestured with an open hand toward the 800 guests sitting in stunned, horrified silence, their phones still recording. You said actions have consequences. The crowd that had been laughing and jeering just minutes earlier now looked like they were watching a car wreck in slow motion. Their amusement had curdled into a thick, palpable fear. They were witnessing the public execution of one of their own, and they knew, with a dawning, sickening certainty, that it could have been any of them. Sterling, Arya continued into the phone, her voice dropping a degree, becoming even colder. Given tonight's events, what is your legal team's recommendation regarding the acquisition timeline? That depends, Ms. Vance, the voice from the speaker replied. Are there any concerns about leadership compatibility between our two companies? Julian's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Isabella's live stream, still running, had surpassed 200,000 viewers. The chat was moving too fast to follow, a blur of text, but certain phrases kept repeating. Karma. She played them. This is insane. Arya's finger hovered over the phone's end call button. Sterling, I will call you back in exactly 10 minutes with my final decision. She ended the call. The silence that fell over the ballroom was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. The only sound was the distant, nervous clinking of glasses as servers in the kitchen tried to pretend they weren't witnessing history. Arya turned to face Julian Croft IV, the man who had poured champagne on her head less than 5 minutes earlier. A lifetime ago. Now, she said quietly, her voice a silken threat, would you like to discuss this properly? Julian's hand trembled as he gripped the microphone stand, sweat beading on his forehead under the hot stage lights. Miss Vance, he stammered, his bravado utterly shattered. I'm sure we can resolve this misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Arya's voice was surgical steel. It sliced through his pathetic attempt at diplomacy. You called me a racial slur. You poured champagne over my head. 800 people watched you humiliate me. She gestured toward Isabella's phone, which lay clattering on the floor where she'd finally dropped it, still live streaming to 250,000 people. And your wife broadcast it to the world. Isabella finally managed to end her stream, but it was a futile gesture. Screenshots, memes, and video clips were already spreading across Twitter and TikTok like a digital wildfire. Champagnegate began trending worldwide within minutes. Harrison, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage, stepped forward. Look, he pleaded, his voice cracking. We didn't know who you were. The guest list, which your father approved, clearly identified me, Arya replied, her gaze unwavering. Your own event coordinator tried to warn your father. Twice. Maria stood frozen at the edge of the stage, clutching her tablet to her chest like a shield, a silent witness to the unfolding execution. Julian tried one last time to regain some semblance of control. Miss Vance, I sincerely, deeply apologize for the confusion. Perhaps we could discuss the acquisition terms in private. I'm prepared to be very generous. The acquisition? Arya tilted her head slightly, a gesture of mild curiosity that was more terrifying than any outburst of anger. Mr. Croft, you seem to have misunderstood something absolutely fundamental. She pulled her phone back out, her thumb scrolling through her contacts with a deliberate, agonizing slowness. Sterling wasn't calling about purchasing your company. The words hit Julian like a physical blow. He staggered back a step. Vanguard Tech already owns 31% of Croft Legacy Holdings stock, Arya stated, her voice as flat and final as a coroner's report. We've been your largest single shareholder for the past 8 months. Eleanor Vance shot up from the head table, her face a mask of disbelief. That's impossible. We would have been notified of any major shareholding. Perfectly legal, Arya said simply, not even bothering to look at her. Your board approved every single transaction, bundled discreetly through subsidiary shell corporations. You were so busy looking for threats from your competitors, you never thought to look at your investors. She found the contact she was looking for and dialed. Sterling. Yes. It's time for the second announcement. Julian's face went from pale to a ghastly, corpse-like gray. Second announcement? The phone rang once before Sterling's familiar, terrifyingly calm voice answered through the speakers. Ms. Vance, are you ready to proceed with the hostile takeover? The phrase hostile takeover echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. 800 gasps rose as one. Isabella, who had bent to retrieve her phone, dropped it again. This time, the screen shattered. Sterling, Arya continued, her voice the calm center of the hurricane. Please explain our current legal and financial position to everyone here. Certainly, came the reply. Vanguard Tech, in partnership with Davidson Financial and Sterling Capital, now controls 67% of Croft Legacy Holdings' voting shares. As of this moment, we have the authority to call an emergency shareholders meeting and replace the entire board of directors. Julian grabbed the edge of the podium to keep from collapsing. That's impossible, he whispered, the words barely audible. My board would have to approve. Arya's eyebrows raised a fraction of an inch. Mr. Croft, your board has been trying to oust you for 6 months. Your company's quarterly losses exceeded 12% this year. Your pension fund managers have been in open revolt over your erratic leadership. She turned, for the first time, to address the stunned crowd directly. Ladies and gentlemen, Croft Legacy Holdings has been hemorrhaging money for years. Their outdated practices, their culture of exclusion, and their leadership failures have cost their shareholders over $400 million in the last fiscal year alone. Jake Morrison was typing so fast his phone screen could barely keep up. This wasn't just a discrimination story anymore. This was a corporate coup happening in real time at a charity gala. The emergency shareholders meeting, Sterling, Arya said, returning to the phone. When is it scheduled? Monday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern. All major shareholders have already been notified. And the agenda? Item 1, a vote of no confidence in the current leadership. Item 2, immediate replacement of the CEO, CFO, and board chairman. Item 3, mandatory implementation of Vanguard's new diversity and inclusion requirements. Item 4, a complete restructuring of executive compensation, tying all future bonuses to measurable equity and performance metrics. Julian's legs finally gave out. He sank into a chair that Maria quickly provided, his face ashen, his multi-$1,000 suit suddenly looking like a cheap rental. But the acquisition, Harrison stammered, his face blotchy with tears of disbelief. You said Vanguard Tech was buying us for $1.2 billion. Arya's lips curved into that same faint, terrifying smile. That was Plan A, a friendly merger with your father retaining a ceremonial leadership role. She looked directly at Julian, her eyes boring into him. You just activated Plan B. The ballroom remained dead silent, the only sound the frantic, almost silent clicking of phone screens as the 800 most powerful people in America shared the unfolding drama with the world. Plan B, Arya explained to the crowd, her voice a lesson in corporate warfare, involves removing your father entirely, delisting your company from the stock exchange, and restructuring Croft Legacy Holdings as a subsidiary of Vanguard Tech. The takeover value drops to $800 million to account for the leadership liabilities, but we eliminate the root problem. Permanently. Isabella finally found her voice, though it came out as a pathetic squeak. You can't do this. This is revenge. Revenge. Arya turned to face her, her gaze cold enough to freeze fire. Mrs. Croft, this is business. Your husband's discriminatory behavior tonight just provided a public, globally televised demonstration of exactly why your company's leadership is a liability that needs to be neutralized. She held up her own phone, showing a recording app that had been running silently throughout the entire incident. Every word he said is documented. His fitness to lead a major corporation has been publicly and irrevocably compromised. Eleanor Vance, the SVP, approached the stage, her face grave but pragmatic. Ms. Vance, what would it take to return to the original acquisition plan? To Plan A? Arya considered this for a long moment, her fingers drumming a slow, steady rhythm against the back of her phone. Sterling, she said into the speaker. Remind me of the conditions for reverting to Plan A. Public acknowledgement of wrongdoing and discriminatory behavior issued via global press release. Immediate and mandatory implementation of bias and sensitivity training for all leadership. The appointment of a third-party oversight committee to monitor all diversity initiatives, and personal, legally binding guarantees from Mr. Croft regarding his future conduct. Julian looked up from his chair, a desperate, pleading hope replacing the arrogance in his eyes. Ms. Vance, I made a terrible, terrible mistake. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Anything. Mr. Croft, Arya interrupted, her voice devoid of all emotion. You have exactly 3 minutes to decide. Plan A, with its public humiliation and stringent conditions. Or Plan B, with its total restructuring and your complete and permanent removal. She glanced at her Patek Philippe watch. Choose wisely. 250,000 people are watching your wife's shattered phone screen, and the market opens in 12 hours. Isabella burst into tears, her sobs ugly and raw. Harrison stared at his father in horrified disbelief, seeing him not as a titan, but as a broken, pathetic old man. The crowd of billionaires sat transfixed, witnessing the brutal, systematic destruction of one of their own in real time. Julian Croft IV, a man who had ruled corporate boardrooms for 30 years with an iron fist, sat broken in a chair, while champagne stains dried on a black woman's dress. Arya checked her watch again. 2 minutes and 30 seconds, Mr. Croft. Julian's voice was a cracked whisper as he leaned into the microphone. Plan A. I choose Plan A. Arya didn't respond immediately. She studied him with the cold, detached calculation of a surgeon examining a malignant tumor. Sterling, she said into the phone. Mr. Croft has indicated his interest in pursuing Plan A. Please outline the specific, non-negotiable requirements. Certainly, Miss Vance, the voice replied, a phantom of corporate law. First, a public apology, acknowledging discriminatory behavior, must be issued within 24 hours via a press release and a live press conference. Second, mandatory comprehensive bias training for all C-suite executives to be completed within 30 days. Third, the appointment of an external chief diversity officer who reports directly to the board, not the CEO. Fourth, the publication of quarterly public reports on inclusion and diversity metrics tied directly to all executive compensation. Julian nodded frantically, his head bobbing up and down. Yes, absolutely. Whatever you need, done. I'm not finished, Sterling's voice continued, relentless. Fifth, Mr. Croft must personally undergo 40 hours of intensive, one-on-one sensitivity training with Dr. Anya Sharma, which will be documented and verified by her office. Sixth, Vanguard Tech receives permanent board representation on the Croft Legacy Board, 3 seats minimum. The crowd murmured. These weren't suggestions. These were terms of unconditional corporate surrender. Seventh, Sterling concluded, the final nail, Any future discriminatory incidents from any member of the Croft family or their executive team will result in the immediate and automatic activation of Plan B, with no further negotiation or opportunity for appeal. Arya walked slowly across the stage, her heels clicking against the marble with the finality of a judge's gavel. The champagne had dried in her hair, but her posture was that of a queen. "Mr. Croft," she asked, "do you understand these terms?" "Yes," Julian whispered. "I need you to speak into the microphone, Mr. Croft. The 800 witnesses in this room and the hundreds of thousands watching online need to hear your acceptance clearly." Struggling to his feet, his legs unsteady, Julian Croft IV gripped the microphone. "Yes," he said, his voice shaking but clear. "I understand and I accept all terms." "Excellent. Sterling, please execute the necessary legal framework." "Right away, Ms. Vance. I have the contracts ready for digital signature. The SEC notification will be filed within the hour, and the press release template is prepared for your review." Eleanor Vance stepped closer to the stage, her voice tight. "Ms. Vance, what about the financial implications of this agreement?" "The original $1.2 billion valuation remains intact," Arya replied coolly, "contingent upon full and absolute compliance with all terms. However, any violation, at any time, drops the valuation to $600 million and triggers the hostile takeover, instantly." She then turned to address the entire silent ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have witnessed something unprecedented tonight. This isn't just a business deal. This is how corporate accountability works in the 21st century." Jake Morrison, the reporter, raised his hand slightly. "Ms. Vance, for the record, what was your primary motivation here? Was this about business or was this personal?" Arya paused, considering her words carefully. "Mr. Morrison, discrimination isn't just morally wrong. It's bad business. It is a cancer that eats away at innovation and profitability. Companies with inclusive leadership teams outperform their less diverse peers by an average of 35%. Diverse executive teams generate up to 70% higher revenue growth from new markets. Mr. Croft's behavior tonight was not just an insult, it was a symptom of the disease that has been killing his company." She gestured towards the data she could call up on her phone in an instant. "Croft Legacy Holdings stock has dropped 18% over the past year. Employee turnover in their executive ranks is 67% above the industry average. 3 of their major clients have terminated their contracts in the last quarter, citing cultural concerns." Julian's face grew more ashen with each devastating statistic. "Vanguard Tech, by contrast," Arya continued, "has increased its valuation by 340% over the past 3 years, precisely because we champion inclusive practices. Our leadership team is 60% women and people of color. Our innovation pipeline is the strongest in the industry because we listen to every voice." Isabella, wiping tears and smeared mascara from her cheeks, sobbed, "But this is public humiliation." "Mrs. Croft," Arya replied evenly, her voice devoid of pity, "you live-streamed my humiliation to 250,000 people. You chose to make this public. You and your husband built this stage, not me." She held up her phone, showing the social media notifications that were still flooding in. "Our Champagnegate is the #1 trending topic worldwide. Your family's behavior is being discussed in boardrooms from Tokyo to London as we speak. Corporate America is watching to see how this resolves." Harrison found his voice, though it wavered with fear. "What happens to our family's reputation?" "That," Arya said simply, "depends entirely on your father's actions over the next 18 hours. She checked her watch, a gesture that had become more menacing than a drawn weapon. "Mr. Croft, you have 18 hours to issue your public statement. The press release must specifically acknowledge discriminatory behavior, commit to systemic, verifiable change, and include a personal, direct apology for tonight's incident. 18 hours. 18 hours! Julian's voice pitched higher with panic. That's not enough time to craft the proper messaging, to consult with PR. Mr. Croft, Arya interrupted, her voice like ice. You had 30 seconds to decide whether to humiliate me. 18 hours is more than generous for a simple apology. She turned back to her phone. Sterling, please confirm the market implications if Mr. Croft fails to comply. Certainly, the disembodied voice replied. Croft Legacy Holdings stock will face immediate, catastrophic selling pressure at market open. Its credit rating will be reviewed for an immediate downgrade. Major institutional investors have already contacted our firm to express their grave concerns about leadership stability. The weight of complete and utter financial destruction hung over the ballroom like a storm cloud. Furthermore, Sterling continued, twisting the final knife, Vanguard Tech has preemptively secured provisional agreements with Croft's 3 largest clients. They have already agreed to transfer their multi-million-dollar contracts to us if a hostile leadership change occurs. Julian swayed on his feet, his face a death mask. You're destroying everything I've built. No, Mr. Croft. Arya's voice was steady, clinical, and final. You did that the moment you chose humiliation over basic human dignity. I am merely offering you a chance to salvage something from the wreckage you created. But the choice, as it always has been, was yours. She gestured toward the crowd of 800 silent witnesses. Every person in this room saw you pour champagne over my head. Every person heard you use a racial slur. Your behavior was broadcast to hundreds of thousands of people. Corporate America can no longer afford to ignore discrimination and expect it to be business as usual. Tonight proves that actions have consequences. Real, tangible, financial consequences. Eleanor Vance cleared her throat, her voice strained. Ms. Vance, assuming full compliance, what is the timeline for the integration? 6 months for a complete restructuring, Arya announced. Croft Legacy Holdings will be rebranded as the East Coast division of Vanguard Tech. All employees will be retained and retrained according to our standards of excellence and inclusion. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces in the crowd. Excellence isn't about exclusion. It's about elevating everyone to their highest potential. Julian clutched the microphone like a lifeline. Ms. Vance, he pleaded, his voice breaking. I swear to you this will never, ever happen again. I will do whatever it takes to make this right. Arya studied him for a long, unreadable moment. Mr. Croft, your words tonight revealed who you really are. Your actions over the next 18 hours will determine who you choose to become. She collected her champagne-stained briefcase from beside the podium. Sterling, please send the final binding contracts to Mr. Croft's legal team. The clock starts now. The line went dead. Arya Vance turned to face the 800 guests one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice ringing with the authority of a conqueror. Thank you for witnessing accountability in action. 17 hours and 43 minutes later, a broken Julian Croft IV stood before a bank of television cameras in his company's headquarters lobby. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His usually immaculate hair showed the clear signs of a long, sleepless night of corporate damnation. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, he began, his voice hoarse, reading from a statement. I am here today to address my inexcusable and repugnant behavior at last night's Global Innovation Gala. The press release had gone out at 6 a.m. sharp. By 7 a.m., it was the lead story on every major business network in the world. I publicly humiliated Ms. Arya Vance through discriminatory actions and abhorrent language that have no place in corporate leadership or in any civilized society, he continued, his voice cracking. Behind him, the Blackwood Industries stock ticker, which had been in freefall, showed a modest 3% uptick, the first positive movement in weeks, a sign that the market approved of his forced penance. I take full and sole responsibility for my actions. I used a racial slur, and I poured champagne over her head in front of 800 witnesses. This behavior was racist, degrading, and completely and utterly unacceptable. CNN Business ran a split screen, Julian's pained apology on the left, and damning footage from Isabella's now infamous live stream on the right. "Effective immediately," he choked out, "I am enrolling in a comprehensive 40-hour bias and sensitivity training program with the renowned Dr. Anya Sharma. Furthermore, Croft Legacy Holdings will immediately implement new, stringent, inclusive leadership standards, developed in direct partnership with Vanguard Tech Dynamics." The questions from the press came like rapid-fire gunshots. "Mr. Croft, how do you respond to the widespread calls for your immediate resignation? Will your wife, Isabella Croft, face any consequences for live streaming the incident? What is your message to the countless employees within your own company who have experienced discrimination under your leadership?" Julian's hands shook as he gripped the podium. The board has voted to retain me as CEO, contingent upon my full, absolute, and verified compliance with the reform program laid out by Ms. Vance. My wife, Isabella, will also be undergoing intensive sensitivity training and has deactivated all of her social media accounts, pending the successful completion of her program. Miles away, in her sleek corner office overlooking the Chicago skyline, Aria Vance watched the press conference with a cool, detached expression. Her assistant knocked softly and entered. "Ms. Vance, Dr. Sharma is here for your 10 a.m. meeting." Dr. Anya Sharma, a renowned organizational psychologist whose TED Talks on corporate culture were legendary, entered with a tablet full of notes. "Ms. Vance," she began, her tone professional, "I've reviewed the Croft case file. The reform program you've outlined is one of the most ambitious and comprehensive I have ever seen." "Dr. Sharma, systematic change requires systematic intervention," Aria replied. "What is your preliminary assessment of their commitment level?" "Julian Croft is terrified," Dr. Sharma said bluntly, "and that's actually helpful. Fear of complete financial ruin can be a powerful motivator for genuine behavioral change. His son, Harrison, seems genuinely remorseful and is already asking how he can help lead the cultural change. Isabella—" Dr. Sharma paused, choosing her words carefully. "Isabella is angry and defensive. She sees herself as the victim. She will require different, more direct approaches." Aria nodded. "And the broader organizational culture at Croft?" "A cesspool," Dr. Sharma said. Croft Legacy has a deeply documented history of discrimination complaints. Their HR files show 17 major incidents over the past 3 years alone, all of which were quietly settled with restrictive NDAs. The rot goes deep, which is why your comprehensive approach is the only thing that stands a chance. Tell me about the monitoring system we're implementing." Dr. Sharma pulled up a presentation on her tablet. "Real-time bias detection software will be installed to monitor all internal corporate communications, emails, Slack channels, everything, for problematic and exclusionary language. We are setting up an anonymous reporting system through a third-party app that connects directly to my oversight committee, bypassing the compromised internal HR department completely. We will conduct monthly anonymous culture assessments with rigorous statistical analysis." "And the accountability measures?" Aria asked, her focus absolute. "Executive compensation will be directly and irrevocably tied to the new inclusion metrics. Quarterly 360-degree feedback reviews for all managers will now include a mandatory bias assessment. Any manager who receives more than 2 verified incident reports in a single year faces immediate termination, with no severance." Aria studied the data on the screen. "Dr. Sharma, I need this program to be more than just successful. It needs to be bulletproof. Corporate America is watching this case. It needs to become the new gold standard. It will be, Dr. Sharma said with confidence. I've implemented similar systems at Google, Microsoft, and Tesla after their own public scandals. The Croft Vanguard program will be even more comprehensive, more rigorous, and more transparent than any of them. Meanwhile, back at the headquarters of Croft Legacy Holdings, the emergency board meeting was underway. Eleanor Vance addressed the grim-faced room of 12 directors. The Vanguard Tech integration proceeds on schedule, she announced. Employee retention is currently at 94%, which is significantly higher than we projected. Client confidence is stabilizing, thanks to Ms. Vance's public statements of support for the transition. A board member, Thomas Chen, raised his hand. Eleanor, what about the financial projections? Are we going to survive this? The projections are remarkably positive, she replied, a hint of awe in her voice. The inclusive leadership training, which began last week, has already identified 3 major multi-million-dollar inefficiencies in our innovation pipeline that were caused by homogeneous teams failing to identify key market risks. Vanguard Tech's agile and inclusive methodologies are being implemented across all divisions, and our initial employee morale surveys show a staggering 78% approval rating for the changes. Many employees have expressed profound relief that their long-standing concerns about discrimination and harassment will finally be addressed systematically. The transformation was visible throughout the halls of the Croft building. New posters, designed by Vanguard's marketing team, outlined the new Inclusive Excellence Standards. QR codes for the anonymous reporting system appeared in every conference room and break area. In the main lobby, a massive screen that once showed the stock price now displayed real-time diversity metrics, dashboards for the entire company. In the Executive Training Center, a humbled Julian Croft sat across from Dr. Sharma, working through painstaking bias recognition exercises. Mr. Croft, she said, her tone patient but firm. Describe your thought process when you first saw Ms. Vance walk onto that stage. Julian squirmed in his chair, the memory still raw. I made assumptions based on her appearance and her attire. What specific assumptions did you make? That she didn't belong there, he admitted, his voice low. That she was service staff. And what information, what data did you use to form these assumptions? Dr. Sharma pressed. Julian's voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. Her race, and the fact that she wasn't wearing an expensive, flashy gown like the other women. And how might these unconscious assumptions affect your business decisions on a daily basis, Mr. Croft? They could cause me to overlook qualified candidates for promotion, he said, the realization dawning on him. To make hiring decisions based on my own prejudice rather than on actual merit. To dismiss a good idea because of who it came from. Dr. Moore made notes on her tablet. This awareness is progress, Mr. Croft. Real, lasting change requires acknowledging that these unconscious biases exist in all of us. The program's effects rippled far beyond the walls of Croft Legacy Holdings. Harvard Business School fast-tracked the development of a case study on the Vance paradigm. The Society for Human Resource Management officially adopted ARIA's accountability framework as a new industry best practice. 5 different Fortune 500 companies, spooked by the public nature of the Croft takedown, preemptively requested to license Vanguard's transformation programs. Isabella Croft sat in her first mandatory training session, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. The facilitator, a calm but unflappable psychologist named Dr. Jennifer Walsh, remained patient. Mrs. Croft, your live stream reached a peak of over 250,000 concurrent viewers. What message do you believe that sent to the world? I was just recording what happened, Isabella muttered, refusing to make eye contact. Your commentary, Dr. Walsh said, consulting her notes, included phrases like, "This is hilarious," "The help should know her place," and multiple laughing emojis. How might your viewers and potential business partners of your husband's company interpret those words? Isabella shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I wasn't thinking about interpretation. It was just a joke. Social media has a way of amplifying our unconscious biases to a global audience, Dr. Walsh explained gently. Your platform didn't just broadcast an event, it endorsed a particular interpretation of that event. It gave those biases a global reach and a stamp of approval. The training continued for weeks. Gradually, grudgingly, Isabella began to comprehend the true scale and impact of her actions. 3 months later, the newly rebranded Vanguard East Division, formerly Croft Legacy Holdings, released its first quarterly diversity and inclusion report. The numbers were stark and undeniable. Employee satisfaction was up 34%. The innovation pipeline, measured by the number of new projects greenlit, had expanded by 67%. Client retention was at a record 98%, and revenue growth had exceeded projections by a staggering 23%. Aria reviewed the report from her office, allowing herself a brief, quiet moment of satisfaction. Her assistant buzzed in. Miss Vance, the executives from Microsoft are here for the 2 p.m. meeting regarding their own corporate transformation program. Perfect, Aria said. Send them in. The Microsoft team, 3 senior executives who had been following the Croft case with intense interest, entered the office. Ms. Vance, their lead representative began, we want to be blunt. We want to implement your accountability framework across our entire global organization. Can Vanguard Tech handle a project of that scale? Aria smiled. Gentlemen, systematic change is our specialty. When would you like to begin? Outside her window, the city of Chicago hummed with its usual relentless energy. But inside boardrooms across America and around the world, new conversations about inclusion, diversity, and accountability were happening with a new and profound urgency. The Champagne Gate incident had become a watershed moment, a cautionary tale whispered in every C-suite. For the first time, corporate leaders truly understood that discrimination didn't just carry a reputational risk, it carried real, catastrophic financial consequences. Aria's phone buzzed. It was a text from Dr. Sharma. FYI, Julian Croft just completed his 40-hour program. He showed remarkable transformation. I am recommending him for the next phase of our leadership advocacy training. She typed back a simple reply. Excellent. Real change is possible when the stakes are made crystal clear. The revolution had begun not with a bang, but with a quiet, methodical application of data, strategy, and relentless pressure, just as Aria had always preferred it. 6 months after that fateful night, Aria Vance stood before an audience of 500 of the world's top corporate executives at the National Business Leadership Conference. The same simple black dress, now professionally cleaned and preserved, hung framed in her office. A permanent reminder that dignity preserved becomes power multiplied. Excellence isn't achieved through exclusion, she told the rapt audience, her voice resonating with quiet power. It is achieved by elevating everyone to their highest potential. The Croft transformation had become the stuff of corporate legend. Harvard, Wharton, and Stanford now taught the Vance paradigm in their MBA programs. The case study was required reading. Strategic Response to Systemic Discrimination: How Quiet Power Reshapes Corporate Culture. Julian Croft Tharp sat in the front row, taking notes like an eager student. The broken, arrogant man from the Gala stage had evolved into an unlikely but passionate advocate for inclusion. His company's stock had reached all-time highs. Employee retention was at 97%, and their innovation metrics had soared. Mr. Croft, Aria said, addressing him directly from the stage, would you be willing to share your perspective on the process of systematic change? Julian stood up, his voice steady and confident. Mrs. Vance taught me a lesson I will never forget. Diversity isn't charity. It is a profound competitive advantage. Our executive team is now 55% women and people of color. Our innovation pipeline has tripled. Our profit margins now exceed the industry benchmarks by 34%. He paused, gathering the courage for what he needed to say next. Most importantly, we have worked to create a workplace where every single employee's potential can flourish. And that includes people who look like me, learning to finally recognize and confront our own blind spots and unearned advantages. The audience applauded, a sound of genuine respect that would have been impossible just 6 months earlier. Isabella Croft had undergone her own transformation. Her new, reactivated Instagram account now focused exclusively on amplifying diverse voices in the business world. Her follower count had actually grown, but for entirely different reasons. Young professionals now sought her out for insights on how to recover from public mistakes and grow from them. Accountability, she had written in a recent, widely shared post, isn't punishment. It's an opportunity for profound growth. Harrison Croft now headed Vanguard East's inclusion initiatives. His first major hire had been to bring Dr. Anya Sharma in-house as the company's permanent chief diversity officer. Under her guidance, the company's culture surveys showed remarkable shifts. 89% of employees now reported feeling psychologically safe to express new or dissenting ideas. Verified bias incidents had dropped to 0 for 4 consecutive months. Innovation submissions from employees had increased by 156% across all demographic groups. Client satisfaction ratings had reached all-time company records. The ripple effects of that one night extended far beyond one company. The Vance Standard had been formally adopted by 127 Fortune 500 companies. Boardrooms across America now included real-time bias monitoring as a standard practice. Tying executive compensation to inclusion metrics became the new industry standard. Aria's phone buzzed. It was a message from her assistant. Tesla, Amazon, and Goldman Sachs are all requesting urgent transformation consultations. The demand for systematic change had become a global movement. But Aria's proudest achievement wasn't in the headlines or the corporate reports. It sat in a quiet folder on her computer marked Employee Letters. It contained hundreds of messages from workers whose voices had been marginalized and silenced for years. Ms. Vance, because of your courage, I finally felt safe enough to report the harassment in my department. Management actually listened and made immediate changes. The anonymous reporting system you implemented saved my career. I can contribute authentically now without fear. My young daughter saw your press conference on the news, and she turned to me and said, "Mommy, I want to be a CEO like her someday." These were the real-life stories of transformation. One person, one career, one life at a time. Dr. Sharma's research had quantified the global impact. Companies that implemented the Vance method showed an average of a 67% reduction in discrimination complaints, a 45% increase in innovation patents filed, a 78% improvement in employee retention, and a 23% boost in quarterly revenue growth. The data proved what Aria had always known. Inclusion wasn't just morally right, it was economically essential for survival in the modern world. Standing before the Chicago audience, Aria concluded her keynote address with the words that had become her signature. Real, lasting change doesn't require rage or revenge. It requires strategy, persistence, and an unwavering commitment to human dignity. Because when we elevate everyone, we all rise higher. The standing ovation lasted for 3 full minutes. Later that evening, in a quiet moment between speaking engagements and board meetings, Aria reflected on the path that had led her here. The champagne-stained dress in her office served as a constant reminder. Sometimes, Our greatest humiliations can become our most powerful catalysts for change. Her assistant knocked. Ms. Vance, you have the Congressional Subcommittee call at 4 p.m. They want to discuss the new Corporate Accountability Act they're drafting based on your model. Arya nodded. The private sector success had finally caught the attention of lawmakers. And Ms. Vance, the Vanguard East Quarterly report just came in. Continued excellence across the board. Mr. Croft personally requested to present the new diversity metrics to you himself. Arya smiled. Schedule it. His journey deserves our recognition. This was how real, sustainable change happened. Not through angry, fleeting confrontations, but through strategic, relentless pressure applied with surgical precision. Not through destroying people, but through transforming the systems that allowed their destructive behavior to flourish in the first place. The Vance paradigm had proven that accountability and empathy could coexist, that consequences and compassion could work in tandem, and that the quiet stories of dignity and strength could reshape entire industries. Her phone buzzed again with notifications, meeting requests, speaking invitations, transformation consultations. Corporate America had finally learned that inclusive leadership wasn't optional anymore. It was the price of admission to the future. Have you ever witnessed discrimination in your workplace or community? These real-life stories prove that strategic, intelligent responses can create lasting, revolutionary change. Arya Vance showed us all that stories of quiet power can transform entire systems when we combine raw courage with calculated, strategic action. We want to hear from you. Share your experience in the comments below. Your stories matter. Your resilience inspires others to find their own strategic strength. Subscribe for more weekly real-life stories of professional and personal transformation. Together, we are building a future where every single person's potential can finally flourish. Because real change doesn't happen by accident. It happens when we decide to make it inevitable. Share this story. Comment with your experiences, and subscribe for more tales of transformation. The revolution continues, one strategic response at a time. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions don't come with shouting and noise, but with the quiet, unshakable dignity of one person standing their ground. Here at Beat Stories, we highlight those incredible moments that shift the balance of power. If this story moved you, hit subscribe, because every single week we bring you real stories that shake the system to its core.